pleased to be here today with Judy Bolton-Fasman, author of Asylum. And let me pop that up on the screen, A Memoir of Family Secrets. Judy, thank you so much for being here. Just so excited to have you here today and talk with you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you, Jane. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So when we were doing our little sound and setup check earlier today, we were talking about how this is your first book at age 60, first published book. So how does that feel?
It's a rush of feelings, actually. It feels in some ways miraculous, like it really happened. And it also feels like it took such a long time to get there. I think, as I was telling you before, it's not technically my first book. I've attempted a novel. I have a collection of short stories that I did for my master's thesis. So it's not the first, but it is the first published book, and it's quite a thrill, and it's a little scary because it's such a personal book. So as I said, there's a rush of emotions, but I'm glad to have gotten to this point. It really feels it feels great.
Well, I think that's so inspiring because I think sometimes as writers, we can feel like, as you said, things are taking so long, or we have these long-term goals that we want to achieve, or, trying to get our writing out there. So it seems like it's always a great reminder that it's never too late. It's always, a good time to pursue, your dreams.
It's never too late. And there are many ways and angles to get to this point. I think I told you before when we were doing the sound check that, writing is not a linear process. And getting your material together is not a linear process. And I want to say, especially to women out there who we seem to not have a surfeit of time to do a lot of things. If you're an artist and you're sketching on a napkin, or you're sketching in a notebook when you're, in your car waiting for someone or doing a pickup, that's making art. If you are making notes on your notes app on your phone, or scribbling it on a scrap of paper that happens to be in your car or wherever you are, that's making art. I have discovered the notes app on my phone. I'm a little slow with technology, and I love it. And I've written a couple of essays from those notes, and I'm so grateful for it. And making art is different things to different people, and we all get there. If we keep at it, I think if we persist, we all get there. But I just want to emphasize that there's no one right way to do it. There's no expiration date to do it. There's no expiration on your dreams. I know dreams is a very overused word, but dreaming is really part of the process also. I'll give you an example. The other day I had kind of a non-productive day, but I realized that it really wasn't as unproductive as I thought it was. Mm-hmm. I was making an essay that I wrote the next day. So you sometimes need that dream time. You need that, staring into space time. And I think those are all very integral and very important to the process as well. And I can't emphasize enough that there's no right or wrong way to do this.
Those are great points. Thank you for sharing those, for sure. And like you said, I think for a lot of writers and women especially, some of that work happens in those smaller spaces, like you said, in your car. I've also found the Notes app to be really helpful. And I've also found for me that dictation is really helpful too, as far as just putting in my earbuds and using the Notes app and just talking things out. And I know that it's not, a final finished product, but it's at least kind of getting some of those raw materials out that then you can refine later.
I have a friend who never takes a walk without her phone because things occur to her on the walk. And she just, she's a writer, she's a novelist, and she just, talks into her phone, and she has the ideas there recorded, and she can return to them. And it's particularly helpful if she's working on something that's ongoing, like a novel or a short story or an essay. She always has that to kind of refer back to. And I also find that very helpful. I'm not quite as agile with the technology, with the dictating, but I'll get there because I can see where that can be very useful also.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just I know that raw materials for me has also been, like you said, scribbling in my car on a piece of paper, scrap paper, napkin, whatever's handy. And sometimes that has turned in, to, whatever I needed it to, an article or a column. So that's a great reminder. I think the only difficulty sometimes is then when you have all those scraps and pieces around your house and different computers and journals and all that. Do you have any recommendation for kind of gathering those materials together and not
Um,
losing them?
Yeah, I literally, I think the operative word there is gather. I do occasionally do kind of a clean sweep of all the places I've been scribbling. And as I said, the Notes app is a great place because a lot of it has been contained there. So, and it's connected to my computer, so I can just cut and paste and start a folder or start a Word doc of things. So that's been really super helpful. So I do a clean sweep every once in a while and then I'll look at something and go, oh yeah, I could work on that, or yeah, that's where that went. I mean, and I sort of, it sort of comes back to life for me. So doing that periodic review of what I have and what I've scribbled and what I've taken down in the Notes app is really, really helpful. And it's kind of fun too, because you rediscover ideas that you hadn't thought about in a while or kind of slipped your mind, and they're back again, and it's really it's a gift in some ways.
Absolutely, and then just having those reminders that you can go back to of like, "Oh, yeah, I wrote that down," or "I had this idea,"
Mhm.
and then being able to have those reminders and go back
Right.
and then be able to flesh it out more or explore something. So, would you say with Asylum, has this been a lifelong work in progress for you?
That's a really good question. I think all writing is part of a lifelong work in progress for me. I'll just speak for myself, but I think for a lot of people, I mean, there's I can't remember who writer who said it. There's really only one story out there, and we're all just writing variations of it. Um, I
Interesting.
I started my life as a fiction writer. I got a Master of Fine Arts in fiction, and I quickly realized I wasn't a fiction writer, but nevertheless, I finished the master's, and I did a collection of short stories. And many of those short stories, particularly the title story of my thesis, The 90-Day Wonder, those are the first stirrings, or those contain the first stirrings of Asylum. Um,
Mm.
90-Day Wonder, it's a short story about my father. And the 90-Day Wonder is, and I learned this doing research on this book, not on my thesis, that it was kind of a pejorative term. To me, when I was using it at the age of 24, I thought that is such an incredible term, and it's so lovely, and
Yeah,
it, it
it sounds positive.
it sounds positive. It resonates, and it kind of carries over what I want to say about my dad. But anyway, the term the 90-Day Wonder was in the Second World War in particular, was a college graduate who was recruited to be in the Army, the Navy, whatever armed forces needed them. And in 90 days, literally in 3 months, they graduated as young officers, and then were
Mm.
deployed in my father's case, on a supply ship that was going to the South Pacific Theater. He was 22 years old, and he had he was in command of men all of a sudden that had socks older than him. So it was very, it was just so the
That's
term was,
intimidating.
yeah, so the term was kind of pejorative, from 90-Day Wonders, who do they think they are? But that's what he was, and that's what the short story was about, his time in what I called, immersion in everything Navy. And then it went on to talk a little bit about his life after the Navy. And, it's definitely, I've been obsessed with the questions that I explore in Asylum, for a very long time, and in a multi-genre kind of way. So, I really saw the first stirrings of my memoir in there. But the memoir itself took on and off almost 16 years to write. So it was always something that was in my life, something that I was working on. I think friends and family were afraid to ask me how the book was because, it took so long. But, I had a couple of false starts. And when I found out the secret that is that the memoir is built around, I had to scrap everything I had and start again. Um,
Oh, goodness.
yeah,
That's intimidating.
well, I scrapped it and I didn't. What the book started its life out as an account of the year I mourned my father. And
Mm.
I am Jewish, and in the Jewish religion, um, people say a prayer of mourning called the Kaddish, which means to sanctify, and you say it for close relatives such as parents, a spouse, or God forbid, a child. And
Mhm.
you are obligated, or not obligated. I don't think anybody's obligated to do anything, but it is with the guidelines, so to speak, from the ancient rabbis, is that you say the Kaddish for 11 months for a parent. And I thought, my Kaddish project would start out for a month because my dad died 19 years ago, and my kids were really
Mhm.
young then, and I
Mhm.
just couldn't see myself getting to a synagogue every single night to say the Kaddish. But I thought 30 days is doable, and the first 30 days of mourning are notable in the process of Jewish mourning rituals. But then I started to do more than 30 days. I didn't even realize it. My dad died in early September, and by Thanksgiving, I was still going. So it really, it turned out to be a lovely time. Um, I was in conversation with my dad, even though it was a posthumous conversation. I set aside time for him every day. And we had this sort of relationship. I mean, even though he was dead, the rush of memories, the curiosity about him that I always had was still there, and it was still feeding that relationship.
Mhm.
It wasn't easy to get to synagogue every day for that 11 months. Sometimes I would bring my daughter and son, and my son was 5 at the time, and he'd be in a bathrobe and Scooby-Doo slippers. And, well, that's the way we went to synagogue, and people were actually very amused by that. So, and people were very supportive of that. So that's what I did for 11 months, and I did it in many synagogues in the Boston area, according to when the sun set and when I could make a certain prayer service so that I could pick up my kids from school. And we even went to synagogue in Rome, and I said the Kaddish in Rome. So it was very much a project for me. It was very much something I wanted to do for my dad, and quite frankly for myself. And what ended up happening was that I wrote up the book. It was I journaled for the year, and I started writing the book, and I realized the story didn't have an arc. So I didn't really know what to do about that. It was more of a book for my family or for my kids. And I was visiting a friend in Israel, and she looked at me and she said, "You have to go and find people who knew your father. You have all these questions about him. You have to find people who knew him," which was not so easy because my father was born in 1919, so a lot of his peers were not with us anymore. But I did find people who knew my parents, who knew my father. And from there, I started to pull one thread, and, you pull one thread, another thread comes loose, and I started to figure stuff out. So, and then I started the research process in earnest. That's a long answer to your question.
No, that's fine. No, and I have more questions, based on what you said, but the way that you describe that in the book too, and that's the title of the chapter, is the Kaddish Project, correct?
Yes, exactly.
And you definitely sounded like a woman on a mission with that for sure. And also that there are those specific elements and requirements around it. And so I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit more, but it when you say at times that, you were waiting for that like 10th, person to be there and
Mhm.
feeling anxious about that. And can you describe that a little bit just for people who aren't?
Sure. The cottage, the reason I had to, I mean, people may be thinking, well, why couldn't she just say it at home privately? The cottage is one of the requirements of saying it if you want to say it in a traditional sense. Um, Again, I don't believe there are any requirements for the way people want to mourn or the way people want to pray, but the requirement is that you say the Kaddish among 10 adults that make up a prayer service. And that is so that the mourner doesn't feel isolated, that the mourner has a goal of going somewhere every day and being with people and saying this prayer. So that was what kind of got this frenzy to get to a synagogue or get to a prayer service every day, because I had to say it among 10 adults. And, you're sitting there in the middle of winter and not getting a 10th person was not always a given or so easy, or you'd scrounge people up, or I'd call my husband and say, bring the kids and everything. And, we need a 10th adult. You're the 10th adult. So, so that was, but also, I had a community. I mean, because people, who were also saying the Kaddish for various reasons or various relatives, were with me, and I saw those same people almost every night, particularly when I went to my own home synagogue, and it was lovely. I mean, it was a community that grew up around me. And one of the women from that time, which was 19 years ago, wrote me the loveliest note about Asylum coming out and saying she remembered saying Kaddish with me, and she was so happy that I was able to finish the book. So that was really, really lovely.
How neat. That is amazing. And I remember just being struck by the story that you share in the memoir about, being on the way to synagogue and having a complication there, and that you also pushed through that. Is that a story that you'd like to share?
Oh, you mean when I got stopped for when there was a traffic stop?
Yes.
Yeah, I I was, and actually, that was not my home synagogue I was going to a synagogue in Brookline because I wanted to go to a friend's reading at a really wonderful independent bookstore here in town in Brookline called Brookline Booksmith. I guess I should situate myself. I am just outside of Boston. I mean, I am 10 minutes away from Boston. And Brookline is one.
Such a great town. Love Boston.
Yeah, Boston is really wonderful. We've been here for 25 years, and I wanted to go to this, and it worked out because this particular, what we call a minyan, particular prayer group, met at 7, and the reading was, or maybe I don't know, the reading was at 7:30. Something, and anyway, in any event, I don't remember the exact times, but in any event, the times worked, and I could go and say my Kaddish, and then I could go to the reading. And in my haste, I made an illegal left-hand turn, and as policemen are wont to do when you're stopped for a traffic violation, they like to take their sweet time. And I'm watching the minutes evaporate, the minutes evaporate, the minutes evaporate. And admittedly, I was a little obsessed, and it was still early in my morning, and I didn't really want to miss a day. And I did something that makes a police officer very nervous. I got out of the car and I started saying, I have to be somewhere. Just give me the ticket. I have to be somewhere. And he said, get back in the car. I said, no, give me the ticket and I'll get back in the car. I said, if I have to get a ticket, just give me the ticket. And he said, and then he got out of the car and he had his hand on his holster and he told me to put my hands on the hood of my car and not to move. And he said, I was going to give you a warning, but now I'm going to give you a ticket. And I said, I don't care. I just have to get to synagogue in like 3 minutes, And, I looked at him and I said, my father died, and oh my God, I mean, it just like went on and on, this back and forth with him. And finally he looked at me and he did give me a warning, and instead of a ticket, and he said to me, do you have someone to go home to? I mean, I think he thought I was like absolutely impaired. And I said, I do. And he said, well, I'm sorry about your dad. And he gave me the warning, and I left. And I was able to say at least one Kaddish. In the service, there's usually two places to say the Kaddish. So I said at least one Kaddish. But yeah, that was one of the, and I'm not a person who usually challenges those kinds of things. I mean, if a police officer stops me, he stops me, and I'm just like quiet and I try to just get through it. But I mean, I was just so worked up that I had to get there at a certain time.
It was quite a dramatic scene, and then that question that he asked too of the, "Do you have someone at home?" And it was just so interesting, and definitely lent a different perspective, or showing, like, kind of what's going through his head, that he's going kinda like, "Is this woman okay? And do you have someone to support you? And are you all right?" And,
Right,
it's like
right.
saying all of those things
Right.
just with
Are you
that one
going home to
question.
an empty room and eating cold cereal and, just I mean, he was really concerned.
Well, and especially when you were, again, sort of defying those orders, and getting out of the car and all that kind of stuff too, that
Right.
immediately it's like, "Oh gosh, like, red
Yeah,
flags. This is a
exactly. Yeah.
potentially dangerous
Yeah, police
situation."
officers don't like that. I just
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting just how you devoted yourself to that, and how you were so dedicated about it, and that was able to, awaken something for you.
Mhm.
How, when once you got to the end of that experience, what would you say about that? Like, how sort of did it help you to grieve and process, the loss of your father? It seemed in the book like maybe you had some mixed feelings about it.
I did. It was definitely for me a positive way to grieve, but I was also looking for answers about my dad, and I guess I was sort of trying to pray my way to them. And at that point, I didn't know what I was looking for because I didn't know what the secret was. But I
And so I'll just say, and so talking to Judy Bolton-Fasman about Asylum and Memoir of Family Secrets, and Judy has a really fascinating story that is multiple times, multiple times, and it's just a really fascinating story. Her book right now is it is number one new release in Jewish biography, which is just amazing. So excited. So I'm just going to kind of for a minute, if you guys have any questions for me watching live, and feel free to just type those in the chat. And we'll just wait for Judy to come back on, and it looks like maybe there was just a so, never had this happen before, so I'm thinking, so we'll just wait and one thing about Judy is that I can share. I was not aware of when I was reading this book. So the name Judy Bolton is almost like the mystery of this series of books with well detective character. And so Judy's father actually knew his character to be Judy was actually it almost seems as though this book is almost as though this Friends over life, which is investigative work about personality and just living different so that we can continue this conversation. So, Judy Bolton-Fasman just had her first book published at the age of 60, and which is just really inspiring. A lot of times, we're just finding just to know that whatever age they are, and I know we're so we've had a bit of a technical glitch. So I'm just kind of talking a minute and just hoping that you can find your children and things so that we can resume and so I can also just tell you that architecture for Jewish people so really just practice I guess most people so thank you for your patience. Thanks for tuning in on this. I guess the other thing that I can say that would be really helpful is if you please on YouTube go hit subscribe. I really appreciate it. And I'm just trying to get to the goal of getting 100 subscribers so that then I can annually. It's not just a big garbage list of others members rather than anything businesses. So that is the first goal is just to get to 100 subscribers. Yeah, love you for that. So I would really appreciate your support in that. And another thing that I'm also doing to support the writers here is bookshop. That is author talks. Yes, most of the authors have been featured in scheduled to appear and if you purchase their book through the book, you can help to support the business, but author talks is a small event. And by supporting bookshop authors, which is really so you could link to bookshop authors or author and you can go to them. Even if you can purchase this on bookshop network and you check right before the show is posted quickly. So I'm just thinking here for a minute. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get Judy back on. I'm not sure what's happening. Um, but I think when you're doing live video, you just kind of never know what's going to happen. I think sometimes you just have to publish it really quick. So you may just need to do something. Some of the things Judy says, I think what I'm going to do is just go ahead and hopefully So does that mean that you can hear me all and some actually telling you the audio is not good? So if you can just clarify that for me, um, so you said unplugged, and my internet looks like it's okay. I do really confused sometimes. And so I do have a little confused with sometimes with internet connections to go in and out, even though I'm actually hardwired into my laptop. So the things that you so thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I really love the support through the show. It can be such a challenge. It's great to process being with it is such a struggle. Then actually and so it is my struggle. And I appreciate the patience. I appreciate it. Just experiencing the let me see if I can get her back on.
I'm here.
Okay, you're there. Let me see if I can. Okay. Hi. I just kind of kept talking and tap dancing and hoping you were going to come back on.
Well, I had to leave and come back again. You know what I mean? I had to leave and go back.
Yeah, it was like it just kicked you completely out.
And you were completely garbled. I couldn't hear a thing you were saying.
Well, and my husband had actually said that the audio was not working. So if anyone who's watching live, if you could please just make a quick comment, we should be able to see that. And just let us know if you can hear us okay. But I was mentioning about that you are an arts and culture writer for Jewish Boston. I was telling them about that.
Oh, okay.
And I mentioned about how you had found your voice in nonfiction through writing a newspaper column about adventures in parenting. So, and I also mentioned that your book is a #1 new release on Amazon for Jewish biographies and memoirs. So I was just sort of talking about that a little bit, talking about the show, asking people to go subscribe on YouTube so that I can customize the channel link. Okay, thank you so much, Ken. Appreciate that. So it looks like your husband just saying everything is back to normal. Thank you so much. We depend on our husbands here as or whoever is watching live to tell us like, okay, are things okay now? You can hear us. Okay.
Great.
So I hope that you stay on and we stay connected so that we can keep going with our conversation. That's why I didn't want to click stop either, because I thought I'm just going to wait and see if you're able to.
No, coming back on, leaving and coming back seemed to do the trick. So let's knock wood and let's hope.
Yes. Okay, so we are back with Judy Bolton-Fasman talking about her book, Asylum, a memoir of family secrets. So I want to follow up on something that you said earlier when you talked about being in an MFA program and writing short stories, as part of that program, and then discovering that you were not a fiction writer. That really intrigues me, and I want to hear more about that. So what was it that told you that you were not a fiction writer?
I think I got more and more interested in the people around me and the people in my lives when I became a mother. And what really got me into writing memoir and creative nonfiction was writing about my kids. And, I could only do that for so long before it began to be an issue for them. Once they became teenagers, that just wasn't going to fly. But for about 8 years, I had a local column here in Boston, writing about my kids. It was a parenting column.
Nice.
And I didn't want to write about, like baking cookies with my kids or doing arts and crafts projects, which are lovely, wonderful things to do. And I've certainly did them with my children and enjoyed them very much. But I wanted more to talk about the stories, because I think stories, embedded in stories, there are also always life lessons. So, I would address things like when, they asked me big questions about, God or death, or even just smaller anecdotes that sort of had meaning. It was for a Jewish paper, so it was also tied into the Jewish holidays a lot, and explaining it to them and celebrating it with them, and how my journey was paralleling their journey, and how wonderful that was. And I was also very honest about the glitches. One of the last in parenting, which is, it happens.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
And one of the last things, and one of the columns that got like a really big reaction was, I stopped writing when my daughter, my oldest, or my older child, my daughter Anna, who is now 27, and I have to brag, got into medical school. Yes.
Oh, awesome. Oh, we lost Judy again. Shoot. Well, that's great, that Judy's daughter just got into medical school, and she was just talking about, writing a column. So I think we're gonna give this one more try, and then we might have to reschedule this. So sorry for the inconvenience. Again, it's sometimes you just never know how things are gonna go with this. So my internet appears to be okay on this end. I don't know if y'all can still hear me. If anybody could just make a quick comment and let me know. Okay, Judy's back. Okay, Judy. All right,
All
you're
right. Now I know the secret. I just have to leave to come back.
back.
But
Is it kicking you out almost like automatically or what?
yeah, like it just stops. Like I'm gone. I
Sorry.
vanish.
I'm sorry. So congrats to your daughter for getting into medical school.
Thank you. She was 17, and I had picked her up late from school, and her younger brother was at home, and my husband was away, and it was just one of those nights, one of those, it's not fun to be a mommy night. And she got in the car, and she immediately, after I dropped her off at this activity she had to go to, I started panicking that I had left the oven on, and I had told my son to turn it off at a certain time, and I thought, he's not going to do it. The house is going to burn down. So I went back to the house in between dropping her off, found him perfectly relaxed doing his homework and saying, I know I'm supposed to turn the oven on in 20 minutes, off in 20 minutes. I have the timer on. Went back to get her, was just completely frazzled. And then she just started, she wasn't in a good mood either. She started complaining. And that was it. I parked we weren't far from the house, and I parked the car on the side of the road, and I said, you know how to drive, which she really didn't. She was still learning, but I said, you can get yourself home. I'm leaving you the keys. I'm walking home.
Oh,
And,
gosh.
and it was dark. And, and I think at one point I write, and I see my husband living it up, having dinner out with colleagues. And here I am stuck with this kid in a bad mood. And, so anyway, I started walking, and I thought she would follow me in the car. Well, I realized I got pretty far, and there's no Anna. So again, another police officer comes into the story. I flagged down a police officer, a police car. And I explained to him what happened. And, he's like ready to arrest me for like abandoning my kid. And I said, no, she's 17. And he said, oh gosh, mothers and daughters, my wife gets into it with my daughter, et cetera, et cetera. So she was still parked where I left her, like absolutely sobbing, and I felt horrible. And I got in the back of the police car. He drove me in the back of the police car, which I had never been in a police car in my life. It's quite an adventure. And
Yeah.
I wrote a column about it, and I sort of made it humorous, but I also sort of made it serious, about the
Mhm.
stressors that mothers go through. And that got such a huge response, like, people telling me, "Oh, I once told my kid to get out of the car," and I
Mhm.
once made my kid walk home from soccer. It was just such a it was a more universal experience than I expected it to be. So it was really, but that writing that column was very gratifying. But after a while, I realized my kids needed their lives back. I mean, I always
Mhm.
read the columns to them, and I always made sure my husband saw them so that they were appropriate and they weren't, embarrassing. But
Mhm.
after a while, I had no more stories to tell that were my own, because they were really growing into young adulthood. Um, and I wanted to do something different. I needed to do something different. So I ended that run, but it was a great run, while it lasted, and it got a lot of attention in town. And so it was nice, but it was, but it had a natural end to it. So, and, I listened to that and went on to do other things.
Well, and I also was just sharing, while you had popped out the first time about your name, and that I was not aware of Judy Bolton as a fictional character. I was familiar with Nancy Drew, loved Nancy Drew books, and loved mysteries and all that kind of stuff, but I was not aware that that was kind of the predecessor, really, to Nancy Drew. And so, one thing that I was musing about is saying, like, so you had said that your father gave you that name. Do you think there's some element there of almost like kind of giving this encouragement for this kind of investigative spirit and detective work that you ended up doing on your own family?
You know, um, that was my name was a gift from the universe, as was the title of the book, which I'll talk about later. But Judy Bolton was, yes, she was a girl detective who had her own series in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I actually heard from Judy Bolton's daughter's the creator of Judy Bolton, her daughter. I heard from her, and she said
Oh,
how
wow.
lovely it was that I, remembered her mom and acknowledged the Judy Bolton series in the book. It was really fun to hear from her, and everybody in a family, is assigned a role or falls into a role or has a role to play. And I was the curious one. Some might call it nosy, but I prefer to think of it as curious. And I remember the first time I saw a Judy Bolton mystery, I think was in the library of my school. And I was just like awed to see my name on a book cover. I mean, that was just like,
I bet.
this is really awesome. And I thought, well, this fits me to a T. I mean, I in my own 6-year-old way, I thought, wow, this makes sense. So yeah, I was always very, very, very curious. My mother and father were, they had their difficulties. My mother was 17 years younger than my father, and they were really. My mother was from Cuba, and there was really a cultural and generational gap between them. But nevertheless, they stayed married. They were married, and I was just very curious about them. My mother was very glamorous and beautiful, and she had a walk-in closet that I used to like just spend hours in trying on her clothes, and just looking at all the beautiful things that she had, the cashmere sweaters, the everything. And I think in the book I call it a place of eternal twilight. It was such a place of mystery to me, and my
Mhm.
parents themselves were my first mysteries that I tried to crack. I looked through my father's highboy, mainly because I was just so interested in looking at his handwriting. His handwriting was very distinctive. His print was
Mm.
beautiful and distinctive, and I loved looking at it. So I would look at everything from canceled checks to, whatever he had written down. I even loved the way he made lists, grocery lists, and on the cardboard he got back from his shirts from the laundry. So my parents
Mm.
were a very mystifying and mysterious couple. So I think that's where my detective work began, in the family. And, I quickly acquired the reputation that I was curious. And I can't tell you how many times my father would say to me, curiosity killed the cat. Because I think, after a point, there's only so many questions a parent wants to answer, and there's only so much, nosing around that they can take. So, but that was my role in the family, and I played it to the hilt pretty much.
And do you think that he actually kind of named you after that character, or do you think that it wasn't quite that direct?
I think because I had much older cousins because my dad married late and had me late. I think she had some Judy Bolton books, so I think that sort of appealed to him. But I was named for a favorite cousin of his who was very beloved
Mm.
to him, and that's where my initials JF, Judith Francis, come from. I don't think it comes directly from the Judy Bolton series.
But it's such an interesting connection, and then obviously, all of the investigative and detective work that you've been drawn to throughout your life. It's just such an interesting connection.
Yeah, and I exploit it a little bit in the book for literary purposes, but I'm very forthright about it, and um, but as I said, it's like a gift from the literary universe.
Well, and I also was just alluding to there's, definitely a strong multicultural elements, throughout
Mhm.
the book on both of your parents' sides, and then multiple faith elements too. Can you talk a little bit about that and just give folks a sense of at least just sort of on the surface who your parents were?
Sure. My mom is from Cuba. She's still with us, and she is a Sephardic Jew. A Sephardic Jew is a Jew who's descended from Spanish Jewry that, and she can, trace her roots back to, the 14th, 15th century.
Mhm.
Um, and from there, after the Inquisition, when the Jews were expelled from Spain, my ancestors went to all different kinds of places and ultimately landed in Greece and Turkey. My grandfather was born in Turkey. My grandmother was born in Greece. And things were not good particularly in Turkey. The Jewish population was afraid that the fate that the Armenians were having under the Turks was going to happen to them. And my grandfather and his family, half of them went to what was then Palestine, Israel, and half of them went to Cuba. And mainly they went to Cuba because it was easier for them to adapt to the language. They spoke a Judeo Spanish that's called Ladino, and it's sort of akin to what we would think of as Shakespearean English, but it
Mm.
had some Hebrew words and it had some Portuguese words, and because the Jews and the Moors were neighbors in Spain, it had some Arabic words, but it was mainly a medieval Spanish that they spoke. So it was easier for them to acquire modern Spanish. The same story pretty much with my grandmother's family. Both my grandparents went to Cuba as teenagers and met in Cuba. They did not know each other before that. And my
Mhm.
mother is really the first and only generation, my mother's generation, born in Cuba. But she is so Latinx. You would think that her family was there for many generations. She's
Mm.
very Latinx, and she's very attached to Cuba and very attached to the culture. And my dad was much older. He was born in 1919. He's 17, almost 17 years older than my mother. He was born in New Haven, Connecticut, and his parents, excuse me, were born in Russia, but came over here as one as an infant and one as a 2-year old, and they were very determined to be assimilated. They wanted to leave behind that way of life. They wanted to be Americans. My grandfather Bolton was quite successful at doing that. He actually was a very talented violinist, and he acquired a musician's union card, and he worked his way, or as I like to say, he fiddled his way through Yale.
Oh
That's
my gosh.
that's how he paid for Yale, and there were not many Jews at Yale back then.
Yeah.
He graduated in 1913. He was in Cole Porter's class, but I'm sure he and Cole Porter did not socialize because my grandfather was moonlighting, playing at fraternities and sororities and debutante balls, and at one point. He told me the story that he went to the dean of students at Yale and asked if he could take an exam in the afternoon, schedule it in the afternoon rather than the morning, because he had been playing all night at a party. And the dean looked at him and said, poor boys who have to work should not go to Yale. So that
Oh
was,
gosh.
yeah, so that was but he graduated. He was a civil engineer. He was a professional, and my father was a legacy at Yale, which is kind of interesting and unusual for a Jewish family. But they were very, very, very assimilated. So you have my mother who's brought up traditionally, and my father who's assimilated. So that was also another sort of clash of cultures for them.
And yet your dad, sounded like he was fascinated with Latinx culture in different ways and had
Mhm.
those kinds of connections too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, but I don't want to throw in any spoilers or
Oh,
inadvertently
no, no, no.
will spoil the
I was thinking of his radio show.
his radio show. Yeah, my father loved music. My father also played the violin. And I tried to play the violin, but I was just terrible at it and quit after
Same.
6 years.
Oh, I didn't make it. I didn't make it through Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I don't
Mm,
think so, but I love the instrument, and I think it's so great. I'd
it's
love to be able to
beautiful.
do
It's beautiful, and I wish that I had my grandfather and father's musical talent. Anyway, he loved music, and one of the ways that he loved Latin culture was through its music. And when I was a little girl, he had a radio show called The Music of Spain, and every Sunday, a country and western station would give over time and air, and air time to to the community, and he had a small show called The Music of Spain. And there is, I'm trying to see if I might read a little section from that if you don't
Sure.
mind.
No, that was great.
I'm just trying to remember if I could show you a picture of him. Trying to remember where it
I
is.
remember that shot from the book with the, where he's at the
I
station.
know, isn't that impressive with all those
Yeah,
roles? I know, it's so
that was very
funny.
cool. Let me see if I can, find that.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, here it is. Oh,
Oh,
his
yeah.
mirror effect here. Sorry.
Right, right. There we go.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Very
So,
nice.
um, I can just read a little bit about
Sure.
that picture and about my dad. In a black and white picture of my father playing weekend DJ, scattered white lines break up the photograph's gloss. K. Harold Bolton wears a no-nonsense white shirt, black pants, and a 5 o'clock shadow, even though the clock in the picture is just coming up on 12:15 p.m. In his left hand is a stopwatch. Behind him are consoles with large buttons and instruments to gauge sound levels, instruments that look as if they belonged in a war room rather than a radio station. In front are two turntables unfurling pasodoble music. I know this from the record cover, propped up nearby, announcing in a ribbony script, Suspiros de España, Spanish marching music that has an accompanying pasodoble, a two-step dance that acts out the drama of the bullfight. Traditionally, the man is the matador and the woman his cape, which he whips around. The woman can also take on the role of a bull or an adoring senorita dancing flamenco by herself, much the same way my mother did her own private two-step. My father is offering a toothy grin that announces a happiness born of music and memory. Caballeros y damas, he says into a large microphone suspended from the ceiling. Gentlemen and ladies. His voice pours out of the radio and fills the house, his heavy American Spanish so distinct from my mother's light, high pitched version. We gather around the radio with my mother and thrill to the sound of his voice. In that moment, my father is a celebrity. Despite his accent, he has known all things Spanish for a very long time.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. That gives such a nice, picture of that time and his enthusiasm for that and all of
Yeah, he
those.
taught himself Spanish. I mean, he loved it. He took French in college, but he was very he was a real Spanish aficionado, and he taught himself Spanish. And he actually, my mother said he spoke it grammatically well. His accent, a little off, but he learned it as an adult. So
So can we talk a little bit more about the title, Asylum, and where that comes from and kind of the multiple meanings around that?
yeah, I'd love to. Actually, Asylum is a another literary gift from the universe. I grew up at 1735 Asylum Avenue in West Hartford, Connecticut. And it has multiple meanings. First of all, it's the street where I grew up. That's the most basic meaning. And I see you have the cover up there, and that the picture of the house is actually the house that I grew up in. Um,
Yeah.
and Asylum, my mother, although my mother emigrated to the United States in 1958, her family did not leave Cuba until the early 60s when Castro had already been in place. And they came here as refugees and sought asylum. So that's another multiple meaning. And then there's the more, I don't know if it's tongue in cheek, but there was a lot of bedlam in the house, so that's the asylum also alludes to that as well. So it's really really works.
And the history of the street too, right?
The history of the street. The history of the street is that it was the original site of which is a very awful way to put it, the Asylum for the Deaf and Dumb. That's what it was called, and I'm even uncomfortable saying that. But it was founded by one of Hartford's. It was. I have it in the book
Yeah.
in the 1800s, and the asylum then moved to West Hartford and became the renowned school for the deaf in West Hartford, and had connections to Gallaudet University, which is the premier university in Washington D.C. for the deaf. So that's how Asylum, the street, got its name. Was that it was originally an asylum, and the oh gosh, you know what? I'm just going to look up his name because it's just going to drive me crazy. I could just read a little bit about Asylum too, about the
Because I think it's great how you capture those things in the book too, and kind of shed light on those different aspects.
right. It was the asylum for, I don't keep wanting to saying that, but
It
that
was an
word.
asylum for hearing impaired and
Yeah,
speech
that's much
impaired
better.
folks.
Yeah. And his name was Mason Fitch Cogswell, and he founded it to educate his daughter who was deaf. He wanted her to have an education. So at the intersection of Asylum and Farmington Avenues in Hartford, Connecticut, stands a bronze statue of Alice Cogswell, a little girl who lost her hearing at the age of 2 after a bout of meningitis rendered her, in the unfortunate parlance of the day, deaf and dumb, unable to hear or speak. The statue shows Alice standing in the palms of 2 enormous hands, perfectly manicured like my father's, that together form the word light in sign language. Alice gave Asylum Avenue its name tangentially by virtue of the educational institution that her father, Mason Fitch Cogswell, helped establish to educate her. The Connecticut Asylum at Hartford for the instruction of deaf and dumb persons, the first of its kind in the United States. It opened its doors in 1817 and stayed in its original location.
Oh no. Hopefully Judy will pop back on here in a minute. And then we should probably try to finish up so that then that way we can end on a good note and not keep losing her here. So again, talking with Judy Bolton-Fasman about her memoir, Asylum, in which she, here we go.
I'm back.
There she is. Yay.
I was just reading The Origins of the Name of Asylum, and I think I got most of that before I
Yeah.
vanished.
So you talk about there being a lot of chaos in your house. Can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of some of the things that came into play as you were writing this and putting this together? I guess another thing I'm curious about is, so it's based on your own, obviously your own experience, but then I guess at what point did you realize that there was really, more to uncover there with your parents and there's kind of, several different secrets going on, different
Mhm.
elements. When did you hit on that it was almost like, okay, this is more than just a memoir or almost like a biography of them and insight into their lives, but hey, there's really something here. There are really some elements here to really delve into and explore.
Well, I knew that we were outsiders. I had a mom who was desperate to transplant her beautiful jewel of an island of Cuba to freezing, West Hartford, Connecticut, and
Mhm.
that caused all sorts of all sorts of chaos, and also all sorts of you know, um, it didn't go well. Let's put it that way. But I will say, and I want to emphasize that I am grateful for my multicultural background, and I'm grateful that I had a second language growing up. That's not something that a lot of Americans have, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm grateful that, as a writer now, as a kid, you're always like, oh, I want to be like everyone else. But as a writer and looking back as an adult, I'm grateful for those differences, and I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to explore them in my writing. Um,
Mm.
that's been very important to me. I knew I had a story, this story in particular. I knew I had this book in particular after I found people who knew my father before I was
Mm.
born. That's when I knew I had a story. Um, I always believed, and I can reveal one small secret that I reveal in the book. I always believed my mother's stories. I mean, why not? I was a kid. I loved my mother. I believed whatever she said. But it's my mother. One of the fondest memories I have of being a kid with my mother are two things: going shopping with her to downtown Harvard, and also her reading to me Don Quixote, parts of Don Quixote, and translating them for me when I was very small, because
Mm.
she was getting a master's degree in Spanish literature at a
Which
local.
I also found phenomenal, especially for a woman of that time.
Well,
That's really something.
yeah, she was part of the wave of women in the late 60s that went back to school and, entered the workforce. She wanted to be independent. She really, that was very important to her, to be financially independent and to, to help out. Um, but anyway, she was, struggling during her first year in her master's program. And the way she got into the master's program is she told that they wanted to see a transcript from the University of Havana, and she had always told me that she went to the University of Havana and that she had graduated third in her class, and she graduated third because she flunked gym. That was the story. And I believed it, lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, I didn't question it. I totally
Wow.
believed it. And it wasn't until many years later that I was interviewing her that I realized the dates that she said she went to university didn't jibe. And she had told the college, which is actually my alma mater as well, Trinity College in Hartford, there was no way she could give them transcripts because they were locked behind the Iron Curtain. Now you have to remember, Cuba was really on lockdown in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, there was no going in, no going out. It was pretty much on lockdown, and the embargo was very, very, very strong, even stronger than it is today. So people thought, oh, Cuba, we can't get involved with that. And of course, she can't get her transcripts because we have absolutely no relationship, no diplomatic ties to Cuba. So they took her word for it. Well, we're now in 2012, and I go to Cuba finally for the first time. I mean, this place that loomed large in my imagination throughout my childhood, I'm finally there. I'm walking around the University of Havana, and a young student sees me there and asks me what I'm doing, and sees this Americana that's walking around and probably has Cuban relatives, and I explain that my mother graduated from the School of Social Work, which was also another fantasy of hers, because
Mm.
as the young man told me, there was no School of Social Work. There's never been a School of Social Work at the University of Havana. So the dates don't align, and because he asked me when she graduated, and I said, "Oh, she went to school, I guess in 1957." He's like, "No, the university was closed for all those years." So that was the big red flag, and I finally went back to her, very gently, because you have to do things gently with my mother, and she kind of admitted that she didn't go to university, and she went right to getting a master's degree. And in fact, she has 2 master's degree. So as difficult as my mother was, because right now she's really not well. She's sort of sinking into dementia, but she was a real tiger when she was younger. And as difficult and hard as that was for me, I admire her wiliness. I mean, that is incredible. She went and got a master's degree without having set foot in a university. I mean,
Wow.
you have to
That is incredible.
admire that.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things I found out working on the book, and then it just kind of snowballed from there, and I realized that my mother did not live in a 2-story apartment with 2 floors when I went to go visit in Havana and things like that. So her story sort of fell apart when the Iron Curtain parted. Very much depended upon not going to Cuba and not having access to Cuba. So,
So how did that make you feel, though, about your mom when you found out that, you had sort of always just taken these stories at face value and then discovering like, "Oh, wait a minute, maybe some of these things didn't happen." Like, how did that make you feel at the time?
it made sense to me. Like, it all made sense to me, because her stories didn't make sense when I thought about it, but I had no way of knowing or proving that they weren't what she said they were. And she's a great fantasist. She's a great storyteller, and um, I I wasn't angry. I wasn't disappointed. I was just kind of, gosh, I was kind of in awe. Like, that's really clever. you know and I think that comes with age and maturity, and being a mom myself, and I think all of that understanding and compassion comes as I grew older. I mean, I'm sure if I had discovered these things when I was in my 20s, I would have been really annoyed. I'm
Mm,
not annoyed. I think it's a gift to me as a writer.
interesting. So, what was your path to publication like for Asylum?
um I did publish parts of it in literary magazines. I also published. I sort of became the resident, like, Cuban person for our public radio's essay page, and I wrote a lot about that. I wrote a lot about my dad, and I wrote a lot about my experiences being the kid of a Cuban immigrant, and not having access to her country. Um, so um, so that I was publishing in various essays, and then I acquired an agent, and then I parted from that agent, and then I
Mhm.
had another agent, and this was a hard book to place publication wise, and the big 5 publishing houses loved the story, loved the writing, but couldn't see a way to market it. So I
Mm.
found, I mean, I did a lot of research. My agent, did research, and we found this wonderful independent literary press that happened to be interested in Jewish and Latinx stories.
Oh, awesome.
It was awesome. Um,
Yeah.
so we sent it to them, and it took them quite a while to finally accept the book and decide to publish it. I had to do a rewrite, but I think in the end, I know in the end, the book found the right home, and I've been very pleased with my publisher, Mandel Villar Press. Want to give them a shout out.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it definitely sounds like the right home for your book for sure. And I'm glad that that you kept going with it and that you kept pursuing that because again, sometimes it can be a real challenge, for authors to try to find that right home for their book or,
Mhm.
try to find, like how do I market this? How do I, who is the ideal audience for this book? And
Right.
those can be such difficult questions to answer sometimes. And
Yeah. And I can't discount that there's a little bit of luck involved with this publishing stuff. Just, I mean, there is. I mean, some of it is serendipitous, but I still deep in my heart believe that, just showing up and doing your work and showing up and sending out your work and pursuing your work, I think that that can eventually get a good outcome. Maybe I'm being a little naive, but I don't think so. I think that pursuing as I said before at the top of the program, your dreams don't have an expiration, and although dream seems like a very overrated word. It isn't. It really does fuel the creativity. It fuels the passion. It fuels the desire. It fuels the wanting. So keep dreaming and keep taking notes, keep sketching. That would really be my biggest advice to everybody out there. Just keep on, keep thinking about it. If you can't take notes that day or that week, just keep thinking about it. Don't forget about your what moves you to make art.
yeah, that is great advice for sure. And I guess one other question I have is sort of what would you say like when you thought about sort of the ideal person that you wanted to pick up this book or different elements that you thought would, speak to readers, like what are you hoping that readers take away from your book?
Well, I would imagine they'll know some of the personal story behind it, but also, the Cottage was also not giving up. I mean, that was a year long project, that I called the Cottage Project, but it was really a year long commitment to saying that prayer, and it also reflects on not giving up and keeping and keep pursuing what you feel you need to do. So I think that's what I would most take away from the book, and also um, to be gentle with your parents as you get older, because they're people, they're humans, they have their foibles. My parents were certainly not ideal, but they're my parents and they're my family, and I tell their story. And I hope I've told their story well, and I hope it resonates with readers out there.
Absolutely. Well, Judy, thank you so much for being here. So glad to have you here today.
Thank
So
you,
glad to
Jan.
see that Asylum is, number one in a category on Amazon for Jewish biographies and memoirs. That is so cool. And just wishing you so much success with the book. And how can people kind of keep up with you in your writing?
I have a website, and my latest projects have been essays all about my mom. I think it's time to give her her due because she was really lurking in this book, and she threatened to take over it at times as a character. I don't mean literally. I mean as
Right.
in my imagination. And I have been I've been publishing stories about her, essays about her, and they're all on my website, judyboltonfasman.com. So it's just my name without any spaces.com, and you'll find a selection of my work there.
And people can also find you writing for jewishboston.com as
Yes,
well, right?
yes, yes. Those are more arts and culture pieces, but yes, they can absolutely.
Well, Judy, again, thank you so much. Thank you too, just for hopping back on. Sorry for the sorry for the program kicking you out. I don't know what the problem
Well,
is,
it's,
but
it's all it's all fun of being live, of going live. It's all the intrigue of being broadcast live.
yeah. Well, and thank you to everybody just for hanging in there with us. And go get Judy's book, Asylum. And Judy, again, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Jane. It's been great to be on with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And we will be back next week with another episode of Author Talks, where writers are an open book. I will be talking with David Romero about his book, My Name is Romero. So we will be on about that. And thanks, everybody, so much. Take care. Have a
Thank
great
you.
weekend.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye.